So with all of those accolades mentioned, and yes, we have been in the news. I think the more interesting story is that this really did start out as a passion project. And it was something that I actively tried hiding on the internet. So as you're listening to this story, just kind of keep that in mind. There wasn't a business plan. There wasn't a, whatever. It was just this thing. I come from the design world and I saw a problem and I tried to do something about it. We have gotten an incredible amount of attention via local, national, international news outlets. As mentioned, I was named as one of the 50 most influential people in American cycling, which is quite interesting because I am not really athletic, in my opinion. And Chicagoan of the Year, and no, that is not my bike. It's a friend's bike. He built it. So you're probably like, okay, well, who is this person? How did they get into this? So here are all of my accomplishments of all the ways that I probably shouldn't have been the one leading this. I didn't own a bike for probably 3 years into Bike Lane Uprising. I just used share bikes. I wasn't a part of the biking community. I wasn't a software developer. I was not a marketer. And I really didn't use social media that much. And I was not political. And for anybody that bikes and is a part of the advocacy space in biking, you know that bike lanes are probably one of the most political things out there. So, how did I get involved with Bike Lane Uprising? In 2016, the truck in this photo almost ran me over. I was biking in Chicago, which was named the top biking city that year, and the driver of this truck turned so sharply into the bike lane at a red light that he started pinning me. And he turned so sharply that he actually ended up driving onto the sidewalk to my right as he was rolling through the red light. And I anticipated he didn't know what had happened. I anticipated maybe, I was in his blind spot or who knows what. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that like I wanted and I needed him to know what had happened. And I wanted him to have that with him as he completed the rest of his deliveries that day. So I chased after him. I got him to roll down the window. I point blank asked him, I was like, "Do you realize that you almost ran me over?" And he looked me straight in the face, stone faced, and just said, "Yeah." And then he took off again. Um, I tried to reach out to the company that he worked for. I tried to, investigate like what to do, like with the city, through the city of Chicago. And what I realized is there really wasn't anything that could be done. And the company didn't care. They wouldn't allow me to get past their receptionist. And I just realized like there had to be a better way to, do something about this. And coincidentally, Chicago had been named the #1 biking city that year. 2 weeks afterwards, the first share bike rider in Chicago or in the or actually in the world was killed in Chicago. And it was a really similar circumstance to the incident that I had. And it just stuck with me. And after I graduated, I wasn't used to just working full time. I was used to working full time and going to grad school. So when I graduated, I asked my friends, I was like, "Hey, I have this idea for like documenting bike lane obstructions and like mapping them out to show like problem areas." And my friends said it was a good idea. So I did it. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. It was really just like, something to kind of do in my spare time. And I started finding people online that were posting about bike lane obstructions. And I would just invite them to coffee and I would ask them questions. And I kept hearing the same quote over and over and over. And it was, "I feel like nobody cares. I feel like nobody cares." And because of that, bicyclists, a lot of folks were actually taking matters into their own hands, and tensions were really building between bicyclists and drivers. And like there were a lot of physical altercations taking place in Chicago. So, as folks a part of this group knows, especially the people that bike, only a small percentage of streets have any designated space for biking, and bike lanes that do exist are typically used as, free parking, extra driving lanes, illegal construction sites, distribution centers, and if they're open, they're oftentimes not even maintained. Sorry. So, you're in Toronto, like, think, are they being cleared of glass, debris, crash debris? Are they being plowed all year round? And the reality is they're just not. So, Bike Lane Uprising, I had this idea for, documenting, like, what if, multiple people could, all submit their bike lane obstructions to one repository. And from that, we'd be able to do things with that data. So the idea is folks download our mobile app or submit on the website, and you can upload photos that you've taken of bike lane obstructions. You can, identify what category they are. You can put in the geolocations, or our app will actually extract geolocations, date, time, you name it. You can say whether or not a crash was involved. Once you submit, it gets added to our database feed. It also gets added to our maps. And when you're on the maps, you can actually click around and start to see hotspots as, submissions grow. You'll also be able to see, enough data that you can start to filter those bike lane obstructions. And I'll show you that in a moment. So my passion project that I tried hiding on the internet isn't a passion, or isn't a hidden passion project anymore. Word got out. You can see that we have submissions coming in from all over the US and Canada. And you can see, if you go to our maps, you can filter now by, I think, like 86 different states, but all bike lane obstructions get added to this map. So even if your city's not listed in one of the drop downs, it's still going to show up. And then as more, submissions come in from some of those areas, then we'll start building your city in too. But Toronto already is added to the maps. So you can, switch between the different cluster maps, the pin maps, the heat maps. You can see a breakdown of the different types of bike lane obstructions. So you can see in Lexington, they have like almost 25% of their bike lane obstructions are companies. And you can, kind of filter by, like maybe one or two different categories. So maybe you want to look at, like, well, what are the municipal bike lane obstructions? What are the municipal and construction sites and others? So, like, what are the things that, like, the city themselves are directly responsible for? And then you can look at them through heat maps. You can look at them through clusters. And then in the pinpoints and the clusters, you can actually click and see the actual bike lane obstruction photo that was included with the report. And you can also look and see how your city compares to other cities. So, like, the breakdown between the different bike lane obstruction categories, you can see, like, is your city like dramatically different than, New York or Chicago or something like that. So here's Toronto's. So far, Toronto has submitted over 1,000 bike lane obstructions. This is what it looks like in the cluster maps. So you can see a breakdown. The colors indicate the different bike lane obstruction category. The larger the cluster icon, the more bike lane obstructions in that area. And then as you zoom in, those clusters will start to break down. And then you can also click and see all of the bike lane obstructions via pinpoints, and you can filter. So you can see, here's one bike lane obstruction. It was a private owner vehicle, and you can see the actual photo that was included with it. And here's the heat map. And then here are actual municipal vehicles that have created hotspots in the city. So you can see there's some clear, like, opportunities that the city themselves could address issues within their own, departments. We take the data that's submitted. So in addition to the maps, we also, it offers a lot of opportunity for us to just do more things with it. And as more data comes in, as more data gets spread outside of, the different cities, we're able to do more and more with it. We can run the data through a lot of geospatial insights, compare it via, different bike lane types, see different wards, compare year over year. So far, we've collected over 80,000 bike lane obstructions, and we tend to go more for the qualitative versus quantitative approach. So kind of keep that in mind when you look at that number. So we prefer to learn more about the bike lane obstruction versus just having a lot of bike lane obstructions. And from that, those 80,000 bike lane obstructions, that's probably about $12 to $36 million in unrealized revenue, as far as like fines. And it could easily be more than that depending on the type of bike lane obstruction, because like construction sites, those can be fined much higher. So it's probably good that I teach all of you what a bike lane obstruction is. So this is a bike lane obstruction. You can tell because, yeah. But if you look, my favorite part of this photo is that if you look in this area where the poster is, the poster actually says what to expect when you're expecting a teenager. It's like the just icing on the cake of this photo. And you're probably thinking, oh, this person probably, got themselves into a pickle and they, probably didn't know how to get out of this bike lane and they did it by accident. Well, they actually drove 3 more blocks. So they had 3 opportunities to exit the bike lane and they just kept going. This is also a bike lane obstruction. So this is a car in a bi-directional bike lane forcing bicyclists in 2 directions into oncoming traffic. This is also a bike lane obstruction. So bike lane, companies using bike lanes as distribution centers. So instead of actually paying for those facilities, paying taxes on those facilities, and really improving the environment, they're just using bike infrastructure as their free warehouses. And then this is also a bike lane obstruction. So as we mentioned before, municipal bike lane obstructions are actually pretty common and they're usually some of the most egregious. So this is an example of the Department of Transportation in Chicago actually parking in a bike lane when they had enough room to actually move out of the way. If you look behind this person, you can actually sort of see there was like a few feet that they just parked away from the curb. And they're just kind of chit-chatting. It's rush hour. They're just pushing bicyclists into traffic. And as you know, the Department of Transportation is actually responsible typically for keeping the infrastructure safe for bicyclists. So it's a little salt to the wound there. We interact with a lot of different entities. So again, I started this not really knowing anybody or anything. And our sphere of influence on, where we've been able to take this has really been growing exponentially. We work with, government leaders. We're in the news a lot, pushing the issues. We work with a lot of insurance companies that block bike lanes directly, and attorneys, all sorts of things. Our platform became just a gateway for community engagement. And we in Chicago ended up taking on the Ghost Bike. So for folks that aren't familiar with what a Ghost Bike is, it's a memorial, it's a roadside memorial. They're placed at crash sites where bicyclists have been killed. They're bikes that have been painted white. There's usually some flowers, maybe a plaque. And it's a memorial, but it's also a way to honor the bicyclist that was killed. It's a way to, urge city leaders to, re-engineer that location to make it safer. And it's a little bit of a warning to pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers in that area that, hey, this is a dangerous location, and take that into consideration as you pass through here. We also randomly decided that it would be cool to give out bike lights. During the pandemic, we noticed a lot of people biking without bike lights. And we're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could just give people bike lights? And we're like, hey, wouldn't it be even cooler if they were actually really nice bike lights? And we're like, well, maybe we could get like 100 sponsored. So we hoped for 100, and we found these really nice rechargeable bike lights, and we got 100 sponsored just on our website. Like one by one, you can actually sponsor a set of bike lights. And we're actually probably a little bit closer to 6,000 bike lights that have been sponsored so far. And they've been given across throughout the United States so far. We also created an advocacy cohort. So I started Bike Lane Uprising, and I didn't know anything, and there really wasn't anyone for me to go to for, assistance and guidance. So I would get all of these emails requesting, well, like, how'd you do this? How do you do this? How do you do that? And I was like, well, why don't I just create like a little mini MBA course? And these are some of the categories that we've created, topics on. There's homework. Folks apply for it. So we're kind of getting into the cadence of doing like maybe one a year, but it allows folks that are in there to be a part of a very small cohort. You do homework and you learn about a topic, and then you apply it to your organization, and then just keep on doing it. So if anybody is interested from Toronto, feel free to apply. We're going to be, I think, doing a 101 session somewhat soon. All right, so things that I have learned. There's no silver bullet to solving bike lane obstructions. And I come from the world of design where by better understanding the problem, you can actually come up with some really unique solutions. And our data has allowed us to identify areas where infrastructure and enforcement need to be focused. We've identified loopholes in laws, and we've been able to get those laws changed. We've gotten, policies written and passed. We also identify who blocks bike lanes. So our database can show repeat bike lane obstructors. So this is actually a photo of Lori Lightfoot, who was the mayor of Chicago. And we had a really bad year in Chicago where just there was an exponentially high amount of bicyclists that had been killed that year. And in a 2-week span, we had just a handful of little kids that were killed biking in Chicago, all separate incidences. And the mayor had kind of turned her, just ignored the situation for a long time, but then she used it as a campaign piece, and then immediately after was parking in bike lanes to go and get donuts. So this actually ended up all over the news in Chicago, and she had to actually comment on it in committee. Our data also led to the Office of the Inspector General in Chicago doing an investigation on municipal bike lane obstructions, so ones created by the city themselves, and just the lack of maintenance of bike lanes. And unfortunately, our data has been linked to companies that park in bike lanes, use bike lanes illegally, and them being associated with killing bicyclists. It happened really early on, and it's continuing, unfortunately. So our data, identified a bicyclist in Chicago. She was a triathlete, and she was killed pretty close to my home, actually. And she was killed by a repeat bike lane obstructor. Our, database that particular year, there were 17 times that they had been submitted to our database. And our data has been used in court cases involving bicyclists that have been injured or killed. Lily Shambrook, 3-year-old in Chicago, was biking with her family. And our data shows that the utility company that blocked the bike lane knew about the problem. We had reached out to them years prior. They acknowledged it. They said they were going to do something about it. They didn't. And at the time, there were 21 bike lane obstructions, like years prior to the death. And there's actually like 60 now. So, and we're starting a thing called Uprise. So we're finding our own opportunities for the data to, really try to go proactively and reach out to companies that are having some problems with that. So people submit data to Bike Lane Uprising. We take other really large big data sets and we aggregate that into this thing called Uprise. And then we can do like reports on how the company is doing. We can create educational training programs. And our focus right now is the actual fleet owners themselves and the drivers. And, the idea is that we help them improve their safety and really big data sets. So we're talking like 74 million inspection reports, 174 violations, 4 million crashes, you name it. There's like almost 3 million company profiles in there. So again, driver, annual, quarterly reports, see how you're doing compared to your competitors. And the idea is like, what if we can help these companies reduce their insurance costs by improving safety, and really using the word, the whole ethos of safety as their point of differentiation instead of just like, well, we do it faster or cheaper. And really using it as a way to reward employees that do drive safe and allow them to retain those employees through like, employee bonus structures, things like that. And safe drivers and safe companies can use it to win contracts. So that's a little bit about us. That's some of the stuff that we've been doing. If this sounds interesting to you, sign up, submit bike lane obstructions. You can support our work. We are volunteer based. We do not have any paid employees. You can shop our store, you can become a volunteer, and you can just help spread the word. So with that, any questions?